There is a scene in season 12 of The Simpsons where doctors remove a crayon from Homer Simpson's brain and discover that underneath all the stumbling and the donuts and the doughs, there is a completely functional, genuinely intelligent adult who had been blocked his whole life by a piece of craft supply he shoved up his nose when he was 6. Peter Griffin once sold his soul for half a cookie. Not a full cookie, half of one. These two men have been compared since Family Guy first aired in 1999. Same network, same basic shape, two overweight dads making terrible decisions in animated American suburbs. The comparisons were always going to happen, but the assumption underneath most of them, that Homer and Peter are basically the same kind of stupid, just from different shows, is wrong. And the evidence from both shows, laid out carefully, makes that case in ways that are impossible to argue with once you see them. Welcome to Red Umbrella. This is why Peter Griffin is dumber than Homer Simpson. Section 1. The official verdict. Peter was legally declared mentally disabled. Homer was not. There is a moment in season 4 of Family Guy where a doctor sits Peter Griffin down, shows him a chart, and explains to him as calmly as possible that based on his IQ test results, he is officially, legally, mentally disabled. Not close to the line, not borderline, not in the gray area. Peter scores so low on the test that the chart the show puts on screen places him below the category marked retarded. And below that still is a category labeled creationists, which means the writers of the show were making a joke about how Peter somehow managed to score lower than the lowest measurable category they could think of. The doctor tries to explain this. Peter immediately corrects the doctor on a small technical mistake in how he worded the result. The doctor starts to respond and gets to the words, "The day I am corrected by a ret," before stopping himself mid-sentence, visibly shaking,
and asking Peter to just trust the analysis. That is where we are starting. Not with a loose argument about who seems dumber, not with a personal opinion or a fan theory, with an official, documented, in-show verdict from a licensed professional in a government office with a chart that Peter Griffin is clinically, legally, mentally disabled. The episode is called Petarded. It is season 4, episode 6 of Family Guy, and it first aired on June 19th, 2005. The setup is almost painfully simple. The Griffin family has their neighbors over for game night. They play Trivial Pursuit. Lois, not wanting another fight, quietly switches out the normal question cards and gives Peter the preschool edition cards, the ones meant for children who cannot yet read. Peter wins the game. He does not notice that the questions were absurdly easy. He walks away from that table, genuinely believing he is smarter than everyone in the room. Brian, the family dog, finds this unbearable. He challenges Peter to prove his intelligence by applying to the MacArthur Fellows Program, a real-world award given to genuinely gifted people, and taking their IQ test. Peter agrees without hesitating, which is already its own kind of answer. The results come back, and the show delivers the verdict without sugarcoating it. Peter is not a genius. Peter is not average. Peter is not even close to average. Peter is legally, mentally disabled. Full stop. The paperwork says so. Now here is where it gets important. After learning this, Peter nearly drowns in a bowl of soup. The restaurant, having apparently encountered this exact problem before, provides him with small, floaty armbands, the kind toddlers wear in swimming pools, specifically for soup. Peter puts them on. He still faceplants into the soup. He comes back up, sputtering and genuinely surprised that the armbands did not work the way he expected. That is not a cartoon being silly for the sake of it. That is the show giving you a physical demonstration of what the test results mean. Now compare that to Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson gets his IQ tested in season 12, episode 9 of The Simpsons, in an episode called HOMR, which aired on January 7th, 2001. During a medical experiment, Homer had become a human test subject to make money after losing the family's savings. The scientists run an X-ray of his head and find something lodged in the right side of his brain. It is a crayon, a standard, everyday crayon, the same kind kids use to color in books. It had been there since Homer was 6 years old, when he shoved an entire 16-pack of crayons up his nose, sneezed out 15 of them, assumed that was all of them, and went about his life. The doctors explain that the crayon has been blocking the normal development of his brain for his entire adult life. They offer to remove it. They warn him that the surgery could either dramatically raise his intelligence or kill him. Homer thinks about it and agrees to the operation. The crayon comes out. Homer's IQ jumps from 55 to 105. He is suddenly a completely different person.
person, engaged, thoughtful, quick, capable of understanding complicated ideas. He builds a genuine friendship with Lisa, his daughter, who is the smartest person in the family and who had always felt alone in the house because no one else could keep up with her. Homer, post-surgery, can. For a brief stretch of that episode, Homer and Lisa sit together doing crosswords and talking about real things, and Lisa looks happier than she has in years. Then Homer asks Moe, who describes himself as an unlicensed surgeon, to put the crayon back in. He makes this choice. He writes a note to Lisa first, explaining that he is going back to being the old version of himself, that being smart made him realize how special she is, and that he is sorry. Then he gets the crayon put back in his brain and returns to the person he was before. He chose this.
He looked at intelligence, understood it, appreciated it, and deliberately gave it up because he felt it did not fit the life he was already living. That choice, the fact that Homer could make that choice at all, is the single biggest difference between these two characters, and everything else in this comparison flows from it. Peter Griffin has no such moment. There is no episode of Family Guy where a medical professional removes something from Peter's brain and reveals a capable, thoughtful man underneath. There is no surgery, no alternate timeline, no hidden version of Peter who could have been something else. The IQ test in Petarded does not reveal an obstacle, it just reveals Peter. The doctors are not looking at damage that happened to him. They are measuring who he already is, at rest, without any external interference. Homer's stupidity has a documented physical cause. It lives in his frontal lobe, embedded in crayon wax. It has a name and a location. The Simpsons writers gave Homer's low intelligence a specific, traceable origin, and more than that, they gave it an explanation that suggests the real Homer is somewhere underneath, being suppressed. Peter's stupidity has no origin, no backstory, no buried version of himself that could have existed under different circumstances. He does not have a crayon problem. He does not carry a genetic condition or a head injury or years of radiation exposure. He simply scored where he scored, and the chart had to stretch to accommodate him. This matters in a way that goes beyond which character does funny or dumb things on screen. When something has a cause, it has a ceiling. Homer's stupidity has a ceiling. We saw it in Homer. When the cause is removed, Homer lands at 105 IQ. He is a functional, thoughtful, capable adult. He is not a genius, but he is fine. He is more than fine. He is, by every reasonable standard, a normal person who was being held back by a piece of craft supply.
Peter does not have a ceiling like that. No one in the show ever suggests that if circumstances were different, Peter would be smarter. The show treats his score in Petarded as a discovery, not a diagnosis. You discover what was always there. You diagnose something that went wrong. The show uses the word discover. There is also the matter of what happens after the verdict. After learning that he is officially mentally disabled, Peter's first reaction is depression. His second reaction, once he accidentally runs over a news anchor named Tom Tucker, and Tucker recognizes him and lets him go without calling the police, is to realize that being mentally disabled means he can get away with anything. He kicks open stall doors in the women's bathroom. He walks into church and throws Bibles. He sits in a restaurant and announces to the entire room that he would like to say the word testicles. He uses his diagnosis not as a reason to get help or change his behavior, but as a free pass to do whatever he wants with no consequences. This tells you something specific about how Peter processes information. He receives a serious medical verdict about his own mind, thinks about it for about 30 seconds, and converts it into a social loophole. Homer, when he was briefly smart, wrote his daughter a letter and told her she was his greatest accomplishment. The gap between those two responses is not small. The Homer episode, for what it is worth, won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program at the 53rd Annual Primetime Emmy Awards. It was praised by critics for being emotionally real. Lisa and Homer's connection in that episode was written and animated as something genuine. Two people who love each other finally able to talk at the same level, for a little while, before it ends.
That episode is remembered as one of the best Simpsons episodes because it does something with Homer's stupidity that most viewers had never seen before.
It revealed that the stupidity was not the truth of him. The love for his daughter was the truth of him. The stupidity was just a crayon. Family Guy has never made that argument about Peter. The show has not suggested, in any season, across any episode, that Peter's real self is being suppressed by something removable. What you see in Petarded, a man who scores below the bottom of the intelligence chart, nearly drowns in soup, and then uses his diagnosis to yell words in restaurants, is presented as the complete picture. There is no note to Lisa underneath. There is no waiting intelligence. There is just Peter, and the chart, with his name on it, below the bottom line. That is the official verdict. Not a fan opinion, not a reading between the lines, not a subjective take based on comparing funny moments. A licensed professional, a government test, a printed chart, and a score that placed him somewhere the chart was not originally designed to go. Homer has a measurement too, 55, which the DSM-4 places at the very lowest edge of mild intellectual disability. But Homer also has a different measurement on the same scale, 105, reached the moment someone removed what was blocking him. Two numbers that tell a complete story. Peter has one number, the one at the bottom. What makes this comparison genuinely interesting, and what the rest of this essay is going to dig into, is not just that Peter scored lower on a chart. It is what the existence of that chart, that score, and that episode reveal about how each show understands the stupidity of its main character. Because Homer's stupidity, it turns out, was always a story about something else entirely. Peter's was always exactly what it looked like. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And Homer's moments of genuine cleverness, the ones that showed up even before that crayon came out, even while it was still in there, are worth looking at carefully because they change the picture in a way that makes the comparison between these two characters much sharper than a single test result can capture. Section 2. Homer's stupidity has an explanation. Peter's is just who he is. There is a specific kind of dumb that comes from something going wrong. A head injury, a bad childhood, years of drinking, a crayon stuck in your brain since you were 6. That kind of dumb has a story behind it, and when you know the story, the dumb makes a different kind of sense. You can point to the moment it started. You can, at least in theory, point to the thing that caused it. The person underneath the stupidity is still in there somewhere, being held back by whatever went wrong. Then there is a different kind of dumb. The kind that does not have a story. The kind that is not the result of anything in particular. It is just the person. No origin, no cause, no buried version of themselves waiting to be uncovered. What you see is what is there, all the way down. Homer Simpson is the first kind. Peter Griffin is the second. And the more you look at the actual evidence from both shows, the clearer that becomes. Start with Homer. The crayon is the most documented explanation, but it is not the only one. The Simpsons built up an entire stack of reasons for why Homer is the way he is, and none of them are random. First, there is the crayon, established in Homer, Season 12, Episode 9, lodged in the right side of his frontal lobe since childhood, physically blocking the normal development of his thinking for his entire adult life. That one fact alone would be enough to explain a significant drop in functioning for most people. But the show did not stop there. Earlier, in Season 9, Episode 17, an episode called Lisa the Simpson, the show introduced what is called the Simpson gene. This is a genetic trait that runs through the male side of the Simpson family. The idea is simple. Male Simpsons get progressively less intelligent as they get older. It is baked into their biology. Grandpa Simpson is not sharp. Homer is not sharp. The gene, according to the episode, is the reason.
It is a hereditary condition, passed down through the family line, that specifically targets the intelligence of the men in the family and pulls it downward over time. Lisa does not have this problem because the gene only affects the males. So Homer is already working against two separate forces, a physical obstruction in his brain and a genetic predisposition to decline. That would be a heavy load for anyone. Then add the job. Homer has worked at the Springfield nuclear power plant since before the show began. He sits in Sector 7G and has been exposed to nuclear radiation on a near-daily basis for decades. The show references this repeatedly. Homer has been irradiated, has had various unexplained physical changes, and works in conditions that a competent safety inspector would shut down immediately. Homer is the safety inspector. He is not competent. He is also one of the most consistently irradiated characters in the history of animated television. Then add the drinking. Homer drinks heavily, and the show has addressed this directly. In a Season 4 episode called Duffless, the show presents Homer as someone exhibiting real signs of alcoholism. He goes a month without beer as part of a bet, and the withdrawal and behavioral changes are played straight, not just as comedy, but as something the show takes seriously as a problem. There is also a piece of background information the show has referenced that is genuinely dark. Homer was apparently fed beer as a child. His brain was being damaged by alcohol from a very young age, before it even had a chance to develop properly. So to recap, Homer Simpson has a crayon in his brain, carries a genetic condition that makes him dumber as he ages, has been irradiated for decades, and started life with a brain that was being damaged by alcohol before he was old enough to choose otherwise. Any one of those things on its own could explain significant cognitive decline. Homer has all four simultaneously working against him every single day. And the writers knew exactly what they were doing with this stack of explanations. Producer Mike Reiss, who worked on The Simpsons for years, described Homer's writing process openly. He said Homer is a comedy writer's dream because he has everything wrong with him, every comedic flaw, but that the writing team actively debated how far to take his stupidity. There was a stated internal rule in The Simpsons writers' room. Homer can never forget his own name. That was the floor. No matter how dumb the episode needed him to be for the sake of a joke, he could not forget his own name. The writers set a limit, and they held it. Dan Castellaneta, the actor who voices Homer, has gone on record saying that during recording sessions, he would sometimes reject lines that he felt made Homer too cruel or too senseless. He pushed back when Homer crossed the line from bumbling into something that felt wrong for the character. Castellaneta's view was that Homer is boorish and unthinking, but would never be mean on purpose. He had a version of Homer in his head that he was protecting, and he protected it actively. Simpsons showrunner Matt Selman offered a further observation about Homer's intelligence that fills in one more piece of the picture. He said that Homer is usually dumb, but sometimes his intelligence is in direct proportion to his greed. The greedier Homer is for something, the more clever he can become. This explains something that casual viewers of The Simpsons might have noticed. Homer is not uniformly stupid. He is capable of surprisingly sharp thinking in specific situations, almost always when there is something he wants badly enough to be clever about. His brain is not gone. It is just usually asleep.
And greed is one of the things that wakes it up. This is a coherent, thoughtful, carefully constructed picture of a character whose stupidity makes sense within a set of real-world causes. The writers knew where it came from. The writers knew where the floor was. The writers had an actor who was protective of the character's dignity, even when writing for his flaws. Homer's stupidity was a managed creative choice, built on an in-universe foundation that gave it weight and reason. Now look at Peter. In Petarded, when the test results come back, the doctor does not reference any cause.
He does not mention a childhood injury or a genetic condition or years of exposure to something harmful. He shows Peter a chart. He points to where Peter's score lands. Peter is below the line. That is the entire explanation. The score is the explanation. There is nothing underneath it to unpack. The show did not build a stack of reasons for Peter the way The Simpsons built one for Homer. There is no Peter equivalent of the Simpson gene. There is no Peter equivalent of the crayon. No single removable thing that, once removed, would reveal a smarter person underneath. The test in Petarded is not diagnosing a problem. It is measuring a person. Those are two very different things. A diagnosis suggests something went wrong. A measurement just tells you what is there. What makes this even more telling is how the show has handled the moments when Peter occasionally says or does something that seems almost reasonable. These moments exist. Early era Peter, seasons 1 through 3 especially, did have flashes of what felt like a more grounded person. He cared about his family in ways that were legible and real. He would sometimes arrive at the right conclusion through the wrong reasoning. He was not incapable of functioning in the world around him. But those moments were never framed the way Homer's moments of cleverness are framed. When Homer is clever,
the show treats it as a genuine expression of something real, a man who is being held back by physical and biological forces, finding brief windows where those forces relax enough for the real him to show through. When Peter occasionally stumbled into something sensible in the early seasons, it felt more like an accident than a glimpse of something deeper. The Flanderization page on TV Tropes, which tracks how animated characters change over time, notes specifically that Peter's intelligence dropped from idiot to legally mentally disabled over the run of the show, and that this process accelerated significantly after the Petarded episode. The diagnosis, once it existed in the show's universe, became a foundation that the writers built on, not to add complexity, but to go further down. Peter, post-Petarded, is consistently more detached from cause and effect, more resistant to basic logic, and more comfortable in a world where consequences simply do not apply to him. Homer never had that happen. The crayon explanation, which came in season 12, did not make Homer dumber going forward. It actually made him more sympathetic, because it recontextualized everything that came before it. All those years of dumb decisions and missed signals and confused reactions. Suddenly, the show had put a reason behind all of it. The audience was not being asked to laugh at a man who was simply born that way. They were being asked to see a man who was operating at a disadvantage his whole life and still managed to hold a job, stay married, raise 3 kids, and occasionally, in moments that the show treated as genuinely moving, find his way to something real and true and kind. Peter's stupidity does not recontextualize anything. There is no moment in Family Guy where you look back at everything Peter has done and feel differently about it because you now understand where it came from. The Petarded verdict does not add depth to what came before it.
It just confirms what everyone already suspected and gives it an official name. That official name, for the record, carries real weight in the comparison. Homer's measured IQ of 55 places him, according to the DSM-4 guidelines referenced in the HOMR episode, at the very bottom edge of mild intellectual disability. The key word there is mild. He is at the low end of that category, not in the middle of it, not in a more severe category. He is barely over a threshold. And that barely over a threshold position is confirmed when the crayon comes out and his IQ goes to 105. He was not born with a significant intellectual disability. He was a normal person who had a crayon in his brain for his entire adult life. Peter, according to the Petarded episode, falls below the line entirely. The doctor does not reference any equivalent category. He just shows the chart, and Peter's name is below the line, and below that is a joke category that the writers put there to signal to the audience that this is as low as the scale goes. The Petarded episode does not specify a number for Peter's IQ. It does not need to.
The chart tells you everything it needs to tell you. One man is at the bottom of a mild category because of a physical object that can be surgically removed. The other man's name is printed below the bottom of the chart without a number because the chart was not built to go where he landed. The explanations tell the whole story. Homer has 4 overlapping documented reasons for his cognitive difficulties, all of them external, all of them operating on a person who, at 105, is a fully functional adult. Peter has none. He just is what he is. The test found him there. He was always there. And unlike Homer, who chose to go back to being the version of himself the world was familiar with, Peter never had a version of himself to choose between. There was just the one version. And it scored where it scored.
What is worth holding on to, as this comparison continues, is that Homer's stack of explanations, the crayon, the gene, the radiation, the alcohol, all point in the same direction. They point toward a person being suppressed. Peter's lack of explanations points in a different direction entirely, not toward suppression, toward something simpler and, in a way, more final. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the explanations are only one part of the picture, because once you understand that Homer had something physically blocking his intelligence, and that without it, he could actually think clearly, the moments across The Simpsons where Homer does something genuinely clever start to look like something more than writing inconsistency. They start to look like proof. Proof of a real person underneath, leaking through. And those moments are worth examining closely because they are the clearest evidence that Homer and Peter are not just at different points on the same scale, they are operating on entirely different terms. Section 3. Homer has proven genius-level intelligence. Peter has not. There is a version of Homer Simpson that most people who grew up watching The Simpsons never fully registered because the show slipped it past them quietly, usually in between jokes about donuts and Flanders. That version shows up in flashes, sometimes for a single line, sometimes for an entire episode, and every time it does, it makes the same argument, that the dumb Homer everybody knows is not the whole Homer. There is more in there. And when conditions are right, or when he wants something badly enough, it comes out. Peter Griffin does not have a version like that. Not one scene, not one episode, not one moment across the entire run of Family Guy where the show pulls back the curtain and shows you a Peter who is capable of genuine, surprising intelligence.
The gap between these two characters is not just about how often they do dumb things. It is about what each show understands its main character to be capable of, at his best. Start with the most direct example. In Homer, Season 12, Episode 9 of The Simpsons, Homer has the crayon removed from his frontal lobe, and his IQ goes from 55 to 105. What he does with that IQ in the time he has it is worth looking at carefully, because it is not just the show saying he got smarter. It is the show demonstrating specifically what kind of smarter he got. The first thing Homer does with his new brain is write a detailed safety report on the Springfield nuclear power plant, the place where he has worked for years. The report is thorough, it identifies real hazards, it is compelling enough that when it reaches the right people, the plant gets shut down for emergency repairs, and every employee loses their job temporarily. Homer, who had been working in that building for decades without once noticing or caring about its dangers, sat down with a working brain and produced a document that changed things. That is not a throwaway gag. That is the show telling you that Homer, when unobstructed, is someone who pays attention, thinks clearly, and can produce work that has real consequences. The second thing he does is have a conversation with Ned Flanders, his deeply religious neighbor, and by the end of it, he has used logical reasoning to challenge the existence of God in a way that leaves Ned genuinely shaken. A man who, in his normal state, cannot remember what channel the TV is on, sat down and walked through a philosophical argument with enough precision to rattle someone who has built their entire life around faith. The show played this straight. It was not framed as a joke. Homer did it, and the scene treats it as something real. The third thing, and the most important for the long-term argument of this essay, is that Homer forms a genuine bond with Lisa.
Not a surface-level moment, not a one-scene warmth that gets forgotten in the next episode. A real connection between two people who can finally speak at the same level. Lisa, who has spent her whole childhood being the smartest person in her family and feeling alone because of it, suddenly has a father who can keep up with her. They do things together. They talk about actual ideas. Lisa is happier in that episode than she is in most others, and the show is not subtle about why. Homer eventually has the crayon put back in, but before he does, he writes Lisa a note. He says he is taking the coward's way out. He says that being smart made him realize how incredible she is. He says he appreciates her more now than he ever did before. That note, written by a temporarily intelligent man to his daughter before willingly returning to a diminished version of himself, is one of the most genuinely moving pieces of writing The Simpsons ever produced. The episode won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program at the 53rd Annual Primetime Emmy Awards. Critics called it a classic. It earned that. But the crayon removal is just the most concentrated example. Homer's flashes of real intelligence are scattered across the series in moments that are easy to miss, but impossible to explain away once you notice them. In one episode, a brief conversation comes up about the difference between envy and jealousy, two words that most people use interchangeably without thinking about them. Homer, without pausing, gives a precise and correct definition of the difference between them. Lisa, who is the family's acknowledged intellectual, scrambles to check the dictionary. He is right. The show does not explain this moment or make a big deal of it. Homer just knows it and moves on. That is what makes it interesting. It is not performed for the audience. It just comes out.
In the episode where Homer becomes the beer baron, a storyline where he starts secretly brewing and selling his own beer during a prohibition in Springfield, he repeatedly outsmarts Rex Banner, a hard-nosed government agent who has been sent specifically to catch him. Banner is driven, organized, and determined. Homer is lazily operating a home brewery out of pure self-interest. Homer wins, consistently, not through luck, but through a kind of low-key street cleverness that Banner never anticipates because he underestimates Homer at every turn. The show is making a point here about a specific kind of intelligence. Not bookish, not academic, but practical and quick. The kind of smart that does not show up on a standardized test, but absolutely shows up when someone needs to stay 3 steps ahead of a person trying to catch them. There is also a moment during a Bart storyline involving a comet heading towards Springfield. The entire town is panicking. Everyone is convinced the comet will hit and cause catastrophic damage. Homer, looking at the situation without any scientific training, reasons that Springfield's heavily polluted atmosphere will burn up the comet before it lands. He is correct. The comet disintegrates harmlessly on entry. The rest of the town, including people who should arguably know better, missed this entirely. Homer saw it. That is not the behavior of someone with nothing going on upstairs. And then there is The Simpsons movie, released in 2007. The film's climax requires Homer to save the entire town of Springfield, which has been sealed under a giant dome. He has to ride a motorcycle up the inside of the dome, reach the top, and throw a bomb through the one small opening at the exact right moment, using spatial awareness, timing, and a callback to something he learned earlier in the film. He pulls it off. He saves everyone. The solution requires him to hold multiple pieces of information in his head simultaneously, predict the arc of a thrown object while moving at speed on a vertical surface, and execute something that had almost no margin for error. He does it on the first try. This is not the behavior of a character whose stupidity is permanent and total. This is the behavior of a character whose stupidity is specific, tied to particular causes, expressed in particular ways, and capable of disappearing when the right conditions exist. Peter has none of this.
There is no episode of Family Guy where Peter sits down and produces something of value. There is no moment where a visiting professional is startled to discover that Peter knows something he should not know, or handles a situation with unexpected sharpness, or reasons his way to a correct answer that everyone else missed. The show has never suggested that Peter is capable of anything like the beer baron level street cleverness Homer showed, or the philosophical reasoning Homer used on Ned Flanders, or the spatial awareness Homer used on top of the dome. What Family Guy has instead are occasional moments, mostly in the earlier seasons, where Peter stumbles into a right answer or does something that is less actively destructive than usual. These moments exist, but they are structurally different from Homer's moments. When Homer is unexpectedly clever, the show is drawing from a reserve of genuine capability that was established in Homer and reinforced across dozens of smaller moments. When Peter is briefly less stupid than usual, the show is not drawing from anything. It is just a reset, a pause in the usual pattern before the pattern reasserts itself. The show itself confirmed this through the Petarded episode. That episode was the test. That was the moment Family Guy sat down with Peter, applied a formal measurement, and delivered its verdict. The verdict was not surprising to anyone. It matched everything the show had been doing with Peter up to that point. The test did not reveal anything new about Peter.
It just gave a name to something already established. The HOMR episode, by contrast, revealed something that was not fully established before. It said, "The Homer you have been watching is not the real Homer. The real Homer has a crayon in his head. Without it, he can do this. And this, the bond with Lisa, the safety report, the argument that shook Ned Flanders, is what he is actually capable of." That is the difference. One show used its smartness-related episode to add depth to its main character. The other used it to confirm what everyone already knew, and then move on. Homer's proven intelligence is not just a curiosity or a fun piece of trivia from an old episode. It is evidence of something the show built into the character from the beginning and never fully let go of. The idea that Homer's limitations are not the truth of him, that the truth is underneath, and that it occasionally finds its way out in ways that are surprising, quiet, and genuinely moving. Peter's limitations, on the other hand, are the truth of him. The show has never argued otherwise. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And if the ceiling between these two characters is already this clear from what each of them has been capable of at their best, it is worth asking what each of them actually does with their stupidity on a regular basis. Because the gap does not close when you compare the averages. It gets wider. Especially when you look at what happens to the people around them. Section 4. Peter's stupidity escalated. Homer's was always somewhat controlled. Something interesting happens when you watch both shows from the beginning and pay attention to how the main character changes over time. Homer Simpson in Season 1 of The Simpsons and Homer Simpson in Season 12 are recognizably the same person. The voice is the same, the basic impulses are the same. The love for his family,
buried under layers of laziness and poor judgment, is still there and still legible. He gets dumber in certain episodes when the writing needs him to, and then he returns to baseline. The character has a center of gravity that keeps pulling him back to roughly the same place. Peter Griffin in Season 1 of Family Guy and Peter Griffin in Season 10 are not the same person, not in any way that matters. Something happened to Peter over the course of the show's run that did not happen to Homer. And it happened gradually enough that a lot of viewers absorbed it without fully registering what had changed. Peter did not just get written as dumber over time. He got written as a fundamentally different kind of person, one where the stupidity stopped being a character trait and became the entire character, and where the warmth and the good intentions that existed in the early seasons were quietly removed and never replaced. This process has a name among people who study how animated characters change over time. It is called Flanderization, the idea that a character gets reduced to one single trait
repeated louder and louder until everything else about them disappears. The term itself comes from The Simpsons, ironically, named after Ned Flanders, who started as a complex and genuinely interesting character and gradually became nothing but his own religious enthusiasm. The Simpsons invented the concept, and then, in one of the stranger ironies in animated television history, Family Guy took it further with Peter than The Simpsons ever did with anyone. Look at what Peter was in the early seasons. In seasons 1 through 3 of Family Guy, Peter was stupid. That was always true, and the show never pretended otherwise. But he was stupid in a way that still had a person inside it. He made bad decisions because he genuinely did not think things through, not because he had stopped caring about the outcome. When he hurt his family, he usually felt bad about it eventually. When an episode ended, Peter had often learned something, or at least gone through enough to suggest that the experience had registered somewhere. He was a bumbling father in the tradition of a long line of bumbling television fathers. Not smart, not always kind, but recognizably human in his motivations. The TV Tropes Flanderization page for Family Guy describes this arc with precision. It notes that in the early seasons, Peter's harmful behavior was more a case of being innocently unaware of what he was doing wrong, similar to how a conventional sitcom dad operates, too arrogant and too dumb to fully understand his own mistakes, but not malicious. It also notes that around the middle of Season 4, and then much more completely from Season 8 onward, Peter shifted into something else. The page describes it as a psychopathic man-child, a person who is completely indifferent to the suffering he causes, and in some episodes, actively amused by it. The Petarded episode, which aired in Season 4, is widely identified as a turning point. After Peter was officially declared mentally disabled in that episode, the writers appear to have used that verdict as a kind of permission slip. If Peter is legally mentally disabled, then his behavior does not need to make sense in any human way. He does not need to learn things. He does not need to feel the weight of what he does to the people around him. The diagnosis created a floor that the writing could fall through, and fall through it did. By Season 8, Peter was regularly doing things that had no connective tissue to anything resembling normal human motivation. Not stupid decisions made for stupid reasons, but behavior that existed in a kind of moral vacuum, cruel without intention, harmful without awareness, and reset entirely by the next episode, regardless of what happened. The TV Tropes character derailment page for Family Guy puts it plainly. Peter went from a bumbling idiot with slightly good intentions, similar to Homer Simpson but louder and more impulsive, to a character that made even Homer's Flanderized version look like the caring, clumsy dad he was in The Simpsons' early years. That is a significant observation. The Simpsons also Flanderized Homer to some degree. This is documented and acknowledged. The writers have said openly that they pushed Homer's stupidity further over time because they needed to top earlier jokes, which led to moments like a Season 10 episode where Homer admits he cannot read, even though earlier episodes had shown him reading without comment. Homer got dumber as the seasons went on. That is real. But the writers also maintained the stated internal limits. He cannot forget his own name. He is never mean on purpose. And those limits held well enough that Homer never stopped being recognizable as himself. Dan Castellaneta, who voices Homer, actively pushed back on lines he felt crossed a line from bumbling into something colder. He had a version of Homer he was protecting. That protection showed up in how Homer was written, because the actor was in the room, and the actor had a position. Seth MacFarlane voices Peter Griffin. Seth MacFarlane also voices Brian Griffin, Stewie Griffin, and Quagmire, among others. The creative demands on MacFarlane across the show were significant enough that the protective attention a single character actor like Castellaneta could give to Homer was simply not available to Peter in the same way. Whether that contributed to Peter's drift is impossible to say definitively, but the drift happened, and it happened in a direction that Castellaneta's presence seems to have prevented for Homer. The Loathsome Characters Wiki's entry on Peter from Season 8 onward describes the post-Flanderization Peter in terms that are worth sitting with. It notes that where Peter was generally likable in the first 7 seasons, His stupidity after season 8 became annoying and mean-spirited in a way that went far beyond Homer Simpson's equivalent decline. It notes that Peter frequently received no punishment for genuinely harmful actions, making him what it calls a karma Houdini, someone who does damage and walks away clean while the people around him absorb the consequences. It describes the transformation as damaging to the character's reputation to a degree that was not recoverable within the show's own logic. Homer was never described in those terms. Not because Homer never did anything selfish or harmful, he did, regularly, but because the show consistently returned him to a baseline of human recognizability. He could be thoughtless, he could be cruel by accident, he could make decisions that were breathtakingly self-centered. But the show did not stop caring whether he learned anything, and the audience did not stop caring about him, because Homer's stupidity was always filtered through a character who still existed underneath it. The management of Homer's stupidity also shows up in something the Simpsons writers said directly. They described it as an ongoing, active debate in the writers' room. How far to push Homer, where the line was, what he could and could not do while remaining Homer. That debate produced the floor. That floor held, or held well enough to matter. There is no equivalent documented debate about Peter in the Family Guy writers' room. What the show produced instead was a character whose stupidity had no floor, whose behavior in later seasons became functionally limitless in its potential for damage and indifference, and whose connection to the early season Peter, who cared about his kids and occasionally arrived at the right answer, grew thinner with every passing year. This is not an aesthetic judgment about which show is better or which writing room was more talented. It is a factual observation about what happened to each character over time. Homer's stupidity was managed. Peter's was not. Homer's had stated limits. Peter's had none. Homer's writers talked about where the line was. Peter's writers, at least from season 8 onward, appear to have stopped drawing one. What makes this particularly meaningful for the comparison is the direction of the change. Homer got dumber in some ways as the series went on, but he got dumber around the edges, in the specifics of what he did not know, in the increasingly extreme nature of some of his mistakes. The core of him, the love for Marge, the bond with Lisa, the basic decency that surfaced at least once per season in something genuinely moving, stayed largely intact. Peter got dumber in the center. The warmth went first. The lessons stopped landing. The consequences stopped reaching him. What was left was a character who occupied the same narrative space as the early Peter, but did not share his motivations, his emotional range, or his capacity to be affected by what happened around him. Two characters who both started as dumb television dads, written for the same network in the same era for the same basic comedic purpose. One was actively managed and protected by the people responsible for him, and his stupidity was maintained as a trait that lived inside a real person. The other was handed a diagnosis in season 4, and the diagnosis became an excuse, and the excuse became the character, and by season 8, the character the show started with was no longer recognizable in what remained. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Escalation tells you something important about what each show believed its main character actually was, and the difference between someone whose stupidity comes with guardrails and someone whose stupidity has none becomes even sharper when you look at the one area where the two characters diverge most completely. The thing Homer has in abundance that Peter lost somewhere along the way, and that changes everything about how their stupidity actually lands. Section 5. Homer's stupidity comes with a heart. Peter's increasingly doesn't. There is a photo on Homer Simpson's desk at work. It is a photo of Maggie, his youngest daughter, the baby who never speaks, but watches everything with enormous eyes from behind her pacifier. Homer keeps it at the nuclear plant, not at home, not in his wallet, not somewhere he would see it during the nice parts of his day. He keeps it at work, which is the place he hates most, the place he has to drag himself to every single morning for a job he never wanted, working for a boss who treats him as roughly one step above furniture. The reason Homer keeps Maggie's photo at work is explained in Season 6, Episode 13, an episode called "And Maggie Makes 3." The episode is a flashback that tells the story of what happened when Homer found out Marge was pregnant with their third child. Homer had just quit the nuclear plant, a job he despised, to follow his actual dream, which was working at a bowling alley. He was happy. He was doing something he loved. Then the pregnancy happened, and Homer realized he could not support a third child on a bowling alley salary, and he went back to the nuclear plant and asked for his job back. Mr. Burns gave him the job back. And then, because Burns is Burns, he had a plaque installed above Homer's workstation as a daily reminder of his defeat. The plaque read, "Don't forget, you're here forever." Homer could not quit. He could not remove the plaque, so he covered it with photos of Maggie, just Maggie, filling in every letter, until the plaque read something different. "Do it for her." That is Homer Simpson, a man who went back to the job he hated under a boss who mocked him for it, and turned his daily reminder of failure into a daily reminder of love. He did not do this in a moment of dramatic inspiration. He did it quietly, alone, at his desk, with a stack of baby photos. The show revealed it at the end of the episode without announcing it, and it hit with the kind of quiet weight that The Simpsons, in its best years, was uniquely capable of producing. This is not an isolated moment. Homer's capacity for genuine feeling, for love that is specific and real and expressed in ways that cost him something, runs through the show as consistently as his capacity for stupidity. The two things live in the same person, and the show never tried to pretend otherwise. In Season 6, Episode 19, called Lisa's Wedding, Lisa is shown a vision of her future. She falls in love, gets engaged, and brings her fiancé home to Springfield. The man she is engaged to is intelligent and successful and looks down on her family. He wants her to cut ties with them after the wedding. Just before the ceremony, Homer comes to find Lisa. He does not make a speech about why she should stay. He does not argue for himself or for the family. He tells her that she is his greatest accomplishment and that she did it all herself, and that she helped him understand her mother better and made him want to be a better person. He is proud of her. He has always been proud of her. He just wanted her to know. That speech, delivered by a man who cannot reliably remember what year it is or how a telephone works, is one of the most precise expressions of parental love in the history of the show. It is not complicated. It does not use big words or make large claims. It just says the true thing, directly, from a place of complete sincerity. Homer knew exactly what his daughter needed to hear in that moment, and he said it, and the show let it land without undercutting it with a joke. This is documented across dozens of episodes. The Simpsons has a list of moments involving Homer that critics and audiences consistently identify as genuinely moving, not despite his stupidity, but somehow alongside it, because the show understood that a person can be deeply limited in some ways and deeply capable in others, and that love does not require intelligence to be real. The Season 7 episode Lisa's Sax tells the story of how Lisa got her saxophone. Homer had been saving money for an air conditioner, a practical purchase, something the family needed during a brutal summer. Then he was told by a school counselor that Lisa was exceptionally gifted and needed to be given opportunities to develop that gift. Homer spent the air conditioner money on the saxophone instead. He sweated through the rest of the summer without complaint. He never told Lisa what he had given up. The show revealed it in a flashback, quietly, the same way it revealed the Maggie photos. Not as a dramatic gesture, but as something Homer just did, without fanfare, because his daughter mattered more than his comfort. These moments accumulate, season after season, in between the episodes where Homer eats too much and drives into things and forgets basic information about the world around him. The show places these quiet proofs of love. They are not random. They are the thing The Simpsons built Homer around. The idea that this bumbling, limited, frequently ridiculous man is, at his center, a person who loves his family with a depth and a constancy that his intelligence cannot express, but his actions consistently reveal. John Swartzwelder, who wrote 60 episodes of The Simpsons and understood Homer as well as anyone, described his approach to the character in terms that explained the emotional consistency perfectly. He said he wrote Homer like a big talking dog. One moment he is the saddest man in the world because he dropped his sandwich. The next moment he is the happiest man in the world because he found a penny. Pure feeling, no filter, no calculation, just a person responding to the world around him with everything he has, which turns out to be quite a lot. That description, pure emotion, no long-term memory, everything in the moment, is what makes Homer's love for his family so impactful when it shows up. It is not managed or strategic or performed. It comes from somewhere genuine and lands somewhere genuine, and the audience feels the difference. Now look at Peter. Peter Griffin in the early seasons 1 through roughly 3 or 4, had real moments of this kind of feeling. He was a loving father in the tradition of the bumbling television dad. He made terrible decisions, but cared about the outcome. When an episode ended badly because of something he did, he usually felt it. He wanted things to be right with his family. That version of Peter was recognizable as a person who loved his family imperfectly, but genuinely. The petarded verdict and the Flanderization that followed it gradually removed this. The Loathsome Characters Wiki documents the change in specific terms. It notes that in the earlier seasons, Peter was a naive, silly, and well-meaning man who was prone to causing trouble, but had good intentions and would actually learn from his mistakes. The most notable difference, the entry says, is that he was a loving father and husband who cared about his family and tried to do what he thought was best for them. One episode from this era involved Peter saying he would take a bullet for Meg. That Peter, the one who would take a bullet for his most overlooked and mistreated child, is not the Peter the show produced from season 8 onward. The later Peter does not take bullets for Meg. The later Peter is one of the primary sources of damage in Meg's life, and the show frames this not as a failure he feels and regrets, but as a running condition of her existence that generates jokes. The emotional warmth did not fade gradually. It was removed with increasing deliberateness. The episodes stopped returning Peter to a place of genuine feeling. The lessons stopped landing. The moments of real connection between Peter and his children, which had existed in the early seasons as a counterweight to his stupidity, were replaced with more stupidity, louder and more detached from consequence. Homer's emotional moments are documented and praised precisely because they exist against the backdrop of his foolishness. They feel earned because the show makes you live through the foolishness first, and then delivers the feeling at exactly the right moment. The "Do It For Her" plaque lands because you have watched Homer be Homer for 6 seasons. The speech to Lisa lands because you have watched Homer get Lisa wrong for years, and you know what it costs him to get her right in this moment. Peter's equivalent moments, where they still exist in the later seasons, land softer because they are increasingly disconnected from the character the show has been building around them. The warmth, when it surfaces, feels like a remnant, something left over from an earlier version of the character that the current version does not quite know what to do with. This is not just a question of which character is more likable. It is a question of what the stupidity is built around. Homer's stupidity is built around love. The love is the load-bearing wall. Everything dumb Homer does gets filtered through the fact of a man who keeps photos of his baby daughter at his most hated place of work, so that he can look at them when the day gets too heavy to carry. The stupidity and the love exist together, and the love gives the stupidity a context that makes it bearable and sometimes beautiful. Peter's stupidity, especially in the later seasons, is built around nothing. It is self-contained. It does not point toward anything warmer or deeper or more real. It is just the thing the character does, and it keeps doing it, and the people around him absorb it, and the show moves on. A character can be stupid and still be someone. Homer proved that across 30-plus seasons of television. He is someone. He is very specifically, recognizably, movingly someone.
and his stupidity is one of the most interesting things about him precisely because it exists alongside everything else he is. What makes Peter's stupidity feel genuinely different, heavier in the wrong way, less interesting rather than more, is that it increasingly stopped existing alongside anything else. The stupidity became the whole thing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And what that means in practical terms, what it looks like when Peter's stupidity has no heart underneath it to absorb the impact, becomes very clear when you look not at what Peter does to himself, but at what he does to the people closest to him. Section 6. Peter's stupidity is physically dangerous to everyone around him. Homer's usually lands on Homer. Here is something worth paying attention to when you watch both shows closely. When Homer Simpson does something catastrophically dumb, look at who ends up hurt at the end of it. Most of the time, it is Homer. He falls into the gorge. He eats the poisonous fish. He gets his arm stuck in the vending machine. He drives himself into a tree, off a cliff, into a wall. The damage of Homer's stupidity has a consistent address, and that address is Homer Simpson, 742 Evergreen Terrace, Springfield. When Peter Griffin does something catastrophically dumb, look at who ends up hurt at the end of it. Most of the time, it is everyone around him. Lois ends up in the hospital. The kids get taken away by child services. The neighbors get caught in the fallout. The town absorbs collateral damage from a decision Peter made without thinking about anything except the immediate 30 seconds in front of him. This is not a small distinction. It is one of the most revealing differences between these two characters, and it runs through both shows so consistently that once you start noticing it, you cannot stop. Start with the clearest example on record. In Petarded, Season 4, Episode 6 of Family Guy, Peter decides to steal a deep fryer from a fast food restaurant. Not borrow it, not ask for it, steal it in the middle of the restaurant in front of people. While attempting this, he pours boiling hot grease directly onto Lois. Lois ends up hospitalized with severe burns across her body, wrapped in bandages from head to toe, unable to move or care for herself. Because Lois is hospitalized, she cannot care for the children. Because Peter has just been officially declared mentally disabled, Child Protective Services determines that he is mentally unfit to parent his own kids. Meg, Chris, and Stewie are all removed from the home and placed with other families in the neighborhood. Every single person in the Griffin household paid the price for Peter trying to steal a kitchen appliance. Lois paid with her body, the children paid with their home, the family paid with its basic ability to function as a unit. Peter, who caused all of this, walked away from it and used his diagnosis to yell the word testicles in a restaurant. This is the pattern. Not a one-time incident. The pattern. In another episode, Peter drives with his eyes closed. Not because something went wrong or because he was temporarily distracted. He closes his eyes deliberately while the car is moving, apparently out of some combination of confidence and indifference to what happens next. The car continues moving. Peter continues not looking. Whatever is in front of the car becomes the car's problem and, by extension, everyone else's problem. In the episode When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, from Season 3, Episode 15, a salesman knocks on the Griffin family door and Peter answers. The salesman sells Peter volcano insurance. Peter buys it. Quahog, Rhode Island is a coastal town with no volcanoes anywhere in the state or the surrounding region. There are no volcanoes near Quahog. There have never been volcanoes near Quahog. Peter bought insurance for a geological event that has no realistic possibility of ever occurring where he lives, spending money that belonged to the entire family on a product that has a 0% chance of ever being useful to anyone in the Griffin household. The salesman did not trick Peter through a complicated scheme. He knocked on the door, mentioned volcanoes, and Peter handed over money. Lois was not present. If Lois had been present, this would not have happened.
This is the recurring situation that Peter's stupidity creates for his family. The moment Lois steps away from the front door becomes a liability. Now compare this to Homer. Homer has done things that are objectively very dumb and that have caused problems for the people around him. This is not a defense of Homer's decision-making. But trace the damage carefully in Homer episodes and notice where it tends to accumulate. In the famous Gorge episode, Homer jumps Springfield Gorge on a skateboard after daring himself to do it on a dare that he gave himself. He does not make it across. He hits the opposite edge and then rolls back down into the gorge in a sequence of physical disaster that became one of the most replayed moments in Simpsons history. The entire damage of this event is absorbed by Homer's body. Marge is worried. The family is upset, but no one else goes over the gorge. No one else gets hurt. Homer aimed his stupidity at himself and himself alone, and the consequences followed the aim. In the Treehouse of Horror episode where Homer sells his soul for a donut,
The devil comes to collect, and Homer has to face the consequences of a supernatural contract. The situation is serious, at least within the logic of the episode, and Homer created it himself through a unilateral decision to trade his soul for a snack. But the resolution of the episode, Marge produces the marriage contract that establishes his soul belongs to her, which invalidates the devil's claim, shows Homer's stupidity being resolved through the love and resourcefulness of the person he married. The damage was his, the rescue came from outside, and the family was not materially harmed by what he did. He made a terrible deal, and his wife saved him from it, and the show treated that as a complete story. Homer getting stuck in a vending machine, spending hours unable to free himself while a bag of chips he was reaching for sat just beyond his fingers, is a perfect image of Homer's stupidity at its most contained. He is trapped in it. The machine is not bothering anyone else. The chips are not threatening anyone. Homer is in a private war with a snack dispenser, and the snack dispenser is winning. And this affects nobody but Homer. The TV Tropes What an Idiot page for Family Guy documents specific Peter moments that illustrate the dangerous to others pattern in detail. One entry describes Peter tying one end of a rope to his car and the other end to Brian, who is chewing on it, and then driving away. Brian, as a dog, keeps chewing the rope even as the car accelerates. Peter, rather than stopping, keeps driving and taunts Brian. The sequence ends with Peter running over and killing a child riding a bicycle and nearly hitting Joe, his neighbor. Peter's decision to pull a dog on a rope behind a moving car resulted in a child's death. The show treated this as dark comedy. The child was not Homer. The child was not Peter. The child was a bystander who was killed because Peter drove a car with a dog on a rope behind it. This is the structural difference. Homer's stupidity is mostly self-directed. It tends to hurt Homer. Peter's stupidity is outward-facing. It tends to hurt everyone in range. There is a reason for this that goes back to something established in earlier sections. Homer's stupidity comes from physical obstruction and biological circumstance, filtered through a person who genuinely loves his family and does not want to hurt them. When Homer does something that harms people around him, the show generally treats it as a thing he did not mean, or did not foresee, or understood only after the fact, with genuine regret. His intelligence is blocked, not his caring. The caring is still operational, it just cannot always communicate through the filter of the intelligence block. Peter's stupidity, especially post-season 4, comes with a disconnection from consequence that is different in nature. It is not that Peter cannot foresee what will happen, it is that the show has stopped asking him to care about what happens. The damage to Lois in Petarded, burns severe enough to hospitalize her, bandages covering her entire body, is treated as something Peter caused and then essentially moved past. He does not sit with it. He does not feel the weight of having put his wife in the hospital through an act of profound recklessness. He moves to the next problem, which is trying to get his kids back, which he approaches by bringing prostitutes to Cleveland's house. There is a version of that storyline where a father who caused harm to his wife,
who lost custody of his children, would spend the episode in a place of genuine desperation and remorse. There are echoes of that version in the early seasons of Peter, a version of him that would have felt this, that would have carried it, that would have made the episode about more than just the comedy of a stupid man making more stupid decisions. That version of Peter did not survive the transition to the later seasons. Homer kept his equivalent version alive throughout the show's run. When Homer's stupidity hurt people he loved, the show made him feel it. Not every time, not perfectly consistently, but enough that the audience maintained a basic belief that Homer cared whether his family was okay. The practical result of this difference is that Peter's stupidity became harder to watch for a specific reason that has nothing to do with how funny the jokes are. Watching a person cause damage to the people around them, repeatedly, without appearing to register the damage, without the show building in any real cost, is a different experience from watching a person cause damage that bounces back on themselves. Homer's stupidity is comedy that lands on Homer. The audience can laugh because Homer is the one who goes over the gorge. Homer is the one stuck in the vending machine. Homer is the one who sold his own soul for a snack. Peter's stupidity, at its worst, lands on Lois in a hospital bed wrapped in burn bandages. It lands on 3 kids being removed from their home. It lands on a child on a bicycle who was in the wrong place when Peter decided to drive with a rope attached to a dog. 2 kinds of stupid, 2 very different blast radiuses. And the question of who absorbs the damage is not just a moral one. It is one of the clearest possible measures of how each show understands what its main character actually is. But the physical danger is only part of the story, because there is a parallel question that the comparison has been building toward, one that goes beyond who gets hurt and into something more fundamental about each character's relationship with value, with consequence, with the basic mechanics of cause and effect. And the clearest way to see that difference is through one of the strangest documented facts in this entire comparison. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Peter sold his soul twice. Homer sold his once, got a donut, and beat the devil. What each of those transactions says about how these 2 men understand the value of things is something this essay cannot skip past. Section 7. Peter sold his soul twice and still got nothing. Homer at least got a donut. This is going to sound like the setup to a joke. It is not. Everything in this section is documented canon from both shows, and the facts, laid out plainly next to each other, make one of the clearest arguments in this entire essay without needing any extra help. Homer Simpson sold his soul to the devil for a donut. Peter Griffin sold his soul twice, once for concert tickets and once for half a cookie, and got significantly less out of both transactions than Homer got from his single one. When you line up the specifics of all 3 deals, what you are really looking at is a precise measurement of how each character understands the value of things, how each character processes a transaction, and how each character performs under the basic pressure of not wanting to lose something important. Homer wins all 3 categories, by a distance that is not close. Start with Homer's deal. The episode is Treehouse of Horror 4, which is Season 5, Episode 5 of The Simpsons. It aired on October 28, 1993. Homer is alone in the kitchen late at night. He has already eaten everything in the house. He is hungry, and there is nothing left. The devil, in this episode written as Ned Flanders, which is its own layer of comedy, appears and offers Homer a deal. The deal is simple. Homer gets a single chocolate donut. In exchange, Homer gives up his soul. The devil will come to collect it when Homer finishes eating the donut. Homer takes the deal. He eats most of the donut. Then, with a small piece remaining, he realizes that as long as he does not finish the last bite, the transaction is technically incomplete. He puts the last piece of the donut in the refrigerator and goes to bed, feeling that he has beaten the system. In the morning, half asleep and not thinking clearly, Homer opens the refrigerator, sees the piece of donut, and eats it. The devil comes to collect. Now here is the important part. Homer goes to trial. Marge produces the marriage contract from their wedding, which contains a note she wrote in the margin stating that Homer's soul belongs to her. A jury of the damned looks at this and rules in Homer's favor. The devil is legally blocked from taking Homer's soul because Marge already owns it. Homer wins. He keeps his soul. He also ate the entire donut. Think about what Homer did here. He made a bad deal. Objectively, trading your soul for a single donut is not a financially sound decision. But when the consequences of that bad deal arrived, Homer fought back. He had a legal defense. He stood trial. He used every mechanism available to him to contest the outcome. And he won. The donut was eaten. The soul was kept. The devil walked away empty-handed. Homer made a terrible choice, recognized the danger, and through the intervention of his marriage, which itself represents something real and valuable that he has built and maintained, came out the other side without losing the thing that mattered. Now look at Peter. The first soul sale is referenced in a Season 3 episode of Family Guy. Peter sold his soul in 1977 for Bee Gees tickets. The Bee Gees were a popular music group in the 1970s, best known for their role in the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. They were genuinely famous. The tickets had real value to a person who wanted to see them perform. This is not a completely indefensible transaction in terms of what Peter was getting. He wanted to see a concert. He wanted to see it badly enough to trade his soul for access to it. But here is the thing about trading your soul for concert tickets. The concert ends. It ends after a few hours. Whatever you experienced during those hours, whatever joy or excitement or connection to music you felt, it is over by 10 o'clock, and you are driving home with an empty soul and a ticket stub. Peter traded an eternal, irreplaceable piece of his fundamental existence for a few hours of live music. The Bee Gees went on to have more concerts. Peter could have waited for cheaper tickets. He did not. He traded his soul for one show. The second sale happened in 1983. Peter sold his soul again, a soul he no longer technically owned since he had already sold it 6 years earlier, which raises its own questions about how he thought this transaction would work, for half a Malamar. A Malamar is a small chocolate and marshmallow cookie. Not a full cookie, half of one. Peter sold his soul for the second time for half of a small cookie that retails for less than $1 per unit. Let that sit for a moment. Homer sold his soul for a full donut, fought the devil in court, won the case, and kept his soul. Peter sold his soul for concert tickets in 1977, and then sold it again 6 years later for half a cookie, apparently having either forgotten he had already sold it or not understanding that you cannot sell something you no longer own. He received neither eternal salvation nor any lasting benefit from either transaction. He attended one concert and ate half a snack and has been soulless for over 4 decades. The comparison here is not really about the deals themselves. The deals are the surface. What is underneath them is a question about self-awareness, about whether each character has any understanding of what he has, what it is worth, and what the cost of losing it would be. Homer understood. He understood badly enough that he tried to beat the system by not finishing the donut. He was wrong about whether that would work, but the attempt itself shows a mind that recognized the stakes and tried to navigate them. When the trial came, he had a defense.
The defense worked because Homer had built something real, a marriage with Marge that was documented and legally binding, and that real thing saved him from the consequence of his bad decision. Peter shows no evidence of understanding the stakes at any point in either transaction. The 1977 sale suggests a man who decided in the moment that a concert was worth more than his soul, without any apparent consideration of what a soul is, or what losing one permanently would mean. The 1983 sale is harder to explain even on those terms, because by that point the soul was already gone.
Peter either forgot he had sold it, or he did not remember what a soul was, or he was offered half a Malamar, and the offer was compelling enough that the question of whether he still had a soul to sell did not come up. The Comic Vine community discussion about which of these two characters is the bigger idiot lands on this specific comparison as one of the most cited pieces of evidence for Peter. The post that raises it notes that Homer sold his soul for a donut, which people generally agree is pretty stupid, but then immediately points out that Peter sold his soul twice, the second time for half a Malamar. The consensus in that discussion, across multiple contributors, is that the soul sale comparison alone makes a strong case for Peter being the dumber of the two, because Homer at least understood what he was trading and tried to protect himself from the outcome. There is also something worth noting about the donut specifically. Homer chose a donut. A donut is something Homer loves with a consistency and a depth that the show has built around for decades. It is his thing. When Homer trades his soul for a donut, the choice is irrational, but it is at least a choice that reflects who Homer is, a man whose greatest pleasures are simple and food-related and pursued with genuine enthusiasm. He wanted the donut. He wanted it badly enough to make a deal with the devil for it. That is dumb, but it is dumb in a way that makes a kind of internal sense for Homer. Peter sold his soul for Bee Gees tickets in 1977 and half a Malamar in 1983. The Bee Gees concert presumably happened and was probably enjoyable. Half a Malamar was consumed in a single bite. These transactions suggest not a man who loves something so much he would trade anything for it, but a man who does not have a strong enough grasp on what he is trading to register what the trade costs. Homer at least knew he was giving up something significant. The donut had to be worth it, because the thing being traded was worth something. Peter's second transaction, half a cookie for a soul he technically no longer owned, does not suggest a man calculating value at all. It suggests a man who was offered half a Malamar and said yes. And yet, Homer still lost the trial by conventional standards. The thing that saved him was not his cleverness or his legal preparation. It was Marge. It was the note she wrote in the margin of a marriage contract, claiming his soul as hers, which she apparently did because she loved him and knew him well enough to know he might need it someday. That detail is worth keeping in mind as the comparison continues. Homer's dumbest moment, selling his soul for a donut, was survivable because the love his family has for him created a safety net he did not know existed. When Homer fell through the floor of good judgment, there was something underneath to catch him. Peter's dumbest moments, and the soul transactions are not even close to his worst, tended not to have that safety net. Not because Lois does not love him, but because the show, especially in later seasons, stopped building in the catches. Peter went through the floor and kept going, and the people around him went through it with him, and the show treated the falling as the point. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which brings the comparison to the moment that separates these two characters most completely, not in what they did wrong, but in what they chose to do about it. Because Homer, at the most important moment of this entire comparison, made a choice. A real, considered, difficult choice. And the existence of that choice tells you more about the difference between these two men than anything else in either show. Section 8. Homer chose to stay stupid. Peter had no choice. There is a moment near the end of the Homer episode, Season 12, Episode 9 of The Simpsons, that does not get talked about enough. Homer has had the crayon removed from his brain. He has been intelligent for a while. He has written the safety report. He has had the conversations with Lisa. He has seen what his life looks like when the thing blocking his mind is no longer there. He knows, with full clarity, exactly what he is giving up if he puts the crayon back. And he sits down and writes a letter to his daughter. He does not dictate it. He does not ask someone to write it for him. He writes it himself, by hand, in the window of time before he goes to mow and asks for the reinsertion. The letter says that he is taking the coward's way out. It says that being smart made him understand how incredible Lisa is. It says that he appreciates how amazing she really is, and that being able to see that clearly, for the first time in his life, was worth the entire experience, even if he cannot hold on to it. Then he goes to mow, gets the crayon put back in his brain, and returns to being Homer. He chose this, with full knowledge of what he was choosing. He looked at both versions of himself, the one with the crayon and the one without it, understood what each one meant, made a decision that balanced his own happiness against the comfort of the people around him, wrote a letter that demonstrated his reasoning and his love, and then followed through.
That is not the behavior of someone who cannot think. That is the behavior of someone who is thinking very carefully about something that costs him a great deal and doing it anyway because he believes it is the right thing to do for the life he is already living. This single moment, the choice to go back, is the most important piece of evidence in this entire comparison. Not because it makes Homer look smart, but because it makes him look like a person. A real person with agency, with the ability to weigh options, with the capacity to sacrifice something valuable for reasons he can articulate. The stupidity he returned to was not imposed on him from outside. He walked back into it with his eyes open and left a note on the way. Peter Griffin has never made a choice like this. Not because Peter made different choices, but because the structure of Peter's stupidity does not allow for this kind of choice to exist. You cannot choose to return to something if there was never a smarter version of yourself to return from. You cannot make a sacrifice if you do not understand what you are giving up. The crayon removal episode works as a story because it establishes two clear states for Homer, with and without the crayon, and then makes Homer navigate the distance between them consciously. Peter's equivalent episode, Petarded, establishes one state, Peter is legally mentally disabled, and confirms it. There is no second state to navigate between. There is just the state. This is worth spelling out clearly because it is the most fundamental difference in the entire comparison, and it is easy to miss if you are focused on the surface comedy of both shows. Homer's stupidity is chosen. Not originally. He did not choose to put the crayon in his brain at age 6, and he did not choose to have the Simpson gene, and he did not choose to be fed beer as a child. Those things happened to him. But in Homer, when the choice became available, when removing the crayon was possible, and Homer was shown clearly what life looked like on the other side, he made a decision. He decided to go back. He decided to be the version of himself that his friends recognized, that fit more comfortably into his social life, that would not produce safety reports that got people fired. He chose the familiar dumbness over the uncomfortable intelligence. And he wrote his daughter a letter before he did it. The letter is the thing. The letter is what separates this from an ordinary storyline about a character making a bad call. The letter shows Homer operating at the full height of his temporarily restored intelligence, and using that intelligence to say something true and loving and specific to the person in his family who would understand it most. He knew Lisa would find it. He knew she would read it after the surgery, when he could no longer produce anything like it. He wrote it anyway. He made sure she had it. That is planning. That is emotional foresight. That is a person thinking several steps ahead and arranging the pieces so that the person he loves most gets what she needs, even after he is no longer capable of giving it to her directly. A man with an IQ of 55,
who usually cannot remember what he ate for breakfast, sat down during his brief window of clarity and made sure his daughter would be okay after the window closed. Peter has never done anything like this. Not once across the entire run of Family Guy has Peter demonstrated the kind of forward thinking that Homer showed in that letter. Peter does not plan for consequences he cannot see. He does not arrange pieces on behalf of people who will need them later. He responds to the immediate moment in front of him, and the moment after that, and the moment after that, with no thread connecting them except his own appetite and impulse.
The reason this matters as a measure of stupidity, not just as a measure of character, is that genuine intelligence, even when mostly blocked or suppressed, shows up most clearly in exactly this kind of situation. The ability to think ahead, the ability to hold multiple pieces of information in your head simultaneously and arrange them in relation to each other. The ability to consider how someone else will feel about something after you are gone. These are not things that require a high IQ number on a test. They are things that require a working connection between thought and feeling, between understanding and caring. Homer had that connection, even with the crayon in. The HOMR episode did not create it. It just temporarily cleared the static so it could come through more strongly. The connection was always there. It was the thing that produced the Maggie photos, the saxophone, the speech to Lisa at her wedding. It was the thing that made Homer Homer, even on his worst days. Peter's connection between thought and feeling, which existed in the early seasons in a recognizable, if limited form, eroded over the course of the show in ways that made exactly this kind of moment increasingly impossible. A post-season 8 Peter is not a character who would write a letter before choosing to go back to being himself, because a post-season 8 Peter is not a character who would recognize that a letter was needed. The awareness required to write that letter requires a level of seeing yourself from outside that Peter gradually lost entirely. The Watch Mojo comparison piece on Homer versus Peter makes the point directly, and it is one of the most cited observations in the whole Homer versus Peter conversation. It states that Homer wins the stupidity comparison because he chooses to remain a moron. The observation is meant as a joke, but it contains a real insight. Choosing to remain a moron requires understanding that you are a moron. It requires the ability to evaluate two states and select between them. Homer could do this. Homer did do this. The choice was documented, the reasoning was expressed in writing, and the letter was left where Lisa would find it. Peter cannot choose to remain a moron because Peter does not have access to the version of himself that would allow the comparison to happen. There is no smarter Peter in waiting, temporarily accessible if someone removed the right thing, that Peter could look at and decide against. The test in Petarded did not reveal an alternative, it just took a measurement. You cannot choose between two things if only one of the things exists. This also changes how you read everything else about Peter. When Peter does something that hurts his family, the question of whether he chose to do it, whether he understood the choice and made it anyway, becomes very different from the same question applied to Homer. Homer's hurtful moments are generally the product of blocked intelligence operating on genuine love. He does not mean the harm. He cannot always see it coming. When it lands, the real Homer, the one who wrote the letter, the one who covered the plaque with Maggie photos, is still in there, feeling the consequence, even if he cannot always articulate it. Peter's hurtful moments, especially from season 8 onward, operate in a different space. The question of whether Peter understands the choice he is making has been answered by the show itself. The Petarded verdict established that Peter's ability to process cause and effect is clinically limited. But the show went further than that verdict suggests it needed to. It did not just confirm Peter's limited understanding. It built episodes around Peter causing harm and then not feeling the harm, not learning from it, not carrying it into the next moment. The clinical verdict became the creative policy. Homer's stupidity is a condition a real person is living inside. It limits him. It blocks him. It has measurable effects on his ability to function. But the person is still in there,
choosing, feeling, occasionally writing letters at exactly the right moment to exactly the right person. Peter's stupidity, at its fullest development, became the whole room. Not a condition a person was living inside, but the entire space in which the character existed. No letter, no choice, no window between two states where a decision could be made and explained and left behind for someone who would need it. Homer went back to being stupid on purpose, for reasons he wrote down, because he loved his daughter enough to explain himself before he lost the ability to do so. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That single fact, documented, canon, emotionally precise, is worth more than any IQ score on any chart. And what it reveals about the difference between these two characters becomes even sharper when you look at how the people around them responded to their stupidity. Because the people in each show reacted very differently to the same basic condition, and those reactions tell you almost everything about which version of stupidity the world around each character was actually living with. Section 9. The show's own characters react to their stupidity differently. Pay attention the next time you watch both shows to the faces of the people standing next to the main character. Not the jokes, not the plots, the faces. The way Marge looks at Homer during his worst moments, and the way Lois looks at Peter during his. The way Lisa sits with Homer after something goes wrong, and the way the Griffin children sit with the fallout of whatever Peter just did. The way Moe and Barney and the Springfield regulars talk about Homer behind his back and to his face, and the way Brian and Quagmire and the Quahog regulars do the same with Peter. Because the people who live alongside a character,
who absorb his decisions and react to his behavior every week, tell you something about that character that the character himself cannot always tell you. They are the measuring instrument. Their reactions are the show's own judgment, expressed through people rather than through narration. And when you line up how Springfield reacted to Homer's stupidity against how Quahog reacted to Peter's, the difference is not subtle. Start with the single most revealing moment in the HOMR episode. When Homer has the crayon removed and becomes intelligent, the first people to benefit are his friends. Barney, Moe, Lenny, Carl, the regulars at the tavern who have known Homer for years. For a brief stretch, intelligent Homer is around, and the show gives you a glimpse of what that friendship looks like when Homer can actually engage with the world at full capacity. And then Homer writes the safety report about the nuclear plant, and the plant gets shut down for repairs, and everybody loses their jobs. Homer's friends turn on him. They burn an effigy of him at Moe's. They shut him out. They preferred the dumb Homer over the smart one, because the smart Homer, operating at full capacity, produced work that cost them materially. They did not hate smart Homer because he was annoying or dangerous. They hated him because he was right, and being right had consequences they did not want to live with. But here's the thing that is easy to miss in that storyline. The friends turned on Homer when he became smart. They did not turn on Homer when he was stupid. For years and years of Homer being Homer, falling into gorges, causing accidents at the nuclear plant, making decisions that no reasonable adult would make, Barney and Moe and Lenny and Carl remained his friends. They drank with him. They laughed with him. They showed up for him in the ways that his particular social world allowed people to show up for each other. The Springfield reaction to Homer's stupidity was tolerance that shaded into genuine affection. The town found Homer funny and familiar and, in his way, lovable. When Homer made the news for something dumb, the reaction from Springfield was usually a kind of collective, exasperated fondness. There goes Homer again. When Homer was in danger, people helped. When Homer needed something, the town generally provided it, or at least did not actively work against him. The show documented Homer's standing in Springfield explicitly in Season 12 in the HOMR episode itself. The doctors who discovered the crayon were stunned by Homer's stupidity during their experiments. They watched him fail basic tests with an amazement that read as almost scientific in its disbelief. But even they did not treat him cruelly. Their reaction was more like people encountering a natural phenomenon they could not explain. Homer's stupidity, even to strangers,
registered as something astonishing rather than something threatening. Now look at Quahog. The Petarded episode documents the community reaction to Peter's diagnosis with the kind of specificity that makes it impossible to misread. When the results come back and Peter is officially declared mentally disabled, the episode was originally going to include a full musical number, a parody of a song from the musical Bye Bye Birdie, in which characters from across Quahog called each other on the phone to spread the news about Peter's diagnosis. The number was cut from the broadcast version because network censors felt it used a particular word too many times in under 2 minutes. That it was written at all tells you something about how the show imagined Quahog responding to the news. The response was not the exasperated fondness of Springfield. It was not collective affection for a familiar figure. It was a phone tree. A community-wide telephone chain dedicated to the rapid spreading of information about how dumb Peter Griffin officially was. Not sympathy, not concern. A phone tree. Tom Tucker, the news anchor Peter accidentally runs over in the same episode, initially responds with anger. Then he recognizes Peter as the person who has just been publicly identified as legally mentally disabled. His response is immediate and specific. He says he cannot press charges against Peter because he would get in trouble for holding a lawsuit against a mentally disabled man. He is not being kind. He is doing a legal calculation. His reason for not pursuing Peter has nothing to do with compassion and everything to do with liability management. Brian, who functions as the closest thing to a conscience the Griffin household has, delivers perhaps the most honest assessment of Peter that the show ever produced. After the test results come back in Petarded, Brian tells Peter, with expletives that were censored on broadcast, that he was right all along and Peter was not a genius. The line is delivered not with sadness or with the gentle concern of a friend who has been proven correct about something painful. It is delivered as a kind of release, the frustration of years of absorbing Peter's behavior finally finding a clean exit through a moment of vindication. That reaction from Brian is important. He is not a stranger. He is the family dog, the most educated member of the household, the character who has spent every day of his life in Peter's presence. He has seen everything. He knows Peter completely. And his response to confirmation of what he already suspected is not compassion. It is, yeah, in your face. That is a reaction that accumulates over time. It is the reaction of someone who has been living with the consequences of Peter's stupidity for long enough that being right about it produces a kind of release that overrides any gentleness. The difference between Brian's reaction to Peter's test results and Lisa's reaction to Homer's crayon situation is one of the starkest illustrations in this entire comparison. Lisa, upon learning that her father's low intelligence was caused by a physical obstruction that could be removed, responded with hope. She spent the episode genuinely happy for the first time in a long time because she finally had a parent who could meet her where she was. When Homer chose to go back, Lisa was heartbroken. She cried. She found the letter he wrote her, and the letter made her cry more, because it showed her that the real Homer, the one who understood her and appreciated her and could tell her what she meant to him, had been in there the whole time. Lisa grieved the loss of smart Homer because she had something to grieve. The connection was real. The loss was real. The people around Peter and Quahog do not grieve any version of Peter. There is no smart Peter to lose. There is no alternative state that the people who love him got a glimpse of and then had taken away. What Quahog has is the Peter that exists, and the accumulated fatigue of living near him, and in Brian's case, the accumulated frustration of being smarter than him while being legally his property. Lois, across the run of the show, is documented in ways that shift significantly from the early seasons to the later ones. Early season Lois responded to Peter with the combination of exasperation and genuine love that characterizes someone who has married a difficult person and still means the marriage. She was frustrated. She was often right, but she was also present in the relationship in a way that suggested she saw something in Peter that was worth staying for. Later season Lois is harder to read in those terms. The show placed Lois in increasingly extreme situations caused by Peter's behavior, the hospital visit in Petarded being among the most documented, and the show's own treatment of her responses shifted in ways that made her endurance less legible as love, and more legible as a feature of the show's universe. She is there because the show requires her to be there.
The warm core of why she stays became less visible as the seasons went on, because the show stopped building episodes around it. Marge never lost her warm core in relation to Homer. The show returned to it consistently. The note in the marriage contract claiming Homer's soul. The moment she saw Homer trying his hardest to be better at various points across dozens of episodes, and responded with patience and love that the audience was invited to share. Marge stayed with Homer because the show kept showing you why. The why was always available. The warmth was always documentable. Director David Silverman, who worked on The Simpsons for years, described Homer as creatively brilliant in his stupidity. That phrase, creatively brilliant in his stupidity, is a remarkable thing for a director to say about a character he has helped animate for decades. It means that Silverman saw something in Homer's dumbness that he found genuinely impressive, in the specific way that a craftsman finds impressive the thing that is hard to do. Homer's stupidity was not easy to write well. It required genuine craft to make a man this limited, this consistently funny, and this consistently sympathetic. The people who made The Simpsons knew what they were doing with Homer, and they respected what they were doing. Peter's stupidity in the later seasons did not generate that kind of commentary from the people making Family Guy. What it generated instead was a character whose behavior became progressively more difficult for the audience to sit with, for reasons that the show itself acknowledged implicitly by occasionally resetting Peter toward his earlier self in episodes where the writers wanted the audience to feel something real. Those resets happened. There are episodes scattered across the later seasons where Peter behaves more like his Season 2 self, where a flicker of the early warmth returns, where a relationship in the Griffin household feels like something real again. They are notable precisely because they are exceptions. The rule, from Season 8 onward, was the other Peter, the one Brian celebrated being right about, the one Tom Tucker did not press charges against for liability reasons, the one Quahog called each other on the phone to discuss. Springfield tolerated Homer and occasionally loved him. Quahog measured Peter and occasionally managed him. Both reactions make complete sense given the characters they were reacting to. And both reactions tell you, without any test results or IQ charts, exactly what kind of stupidity each show had on its hands. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But there is one final dimension of this comparison that everything else has been building toward. Not the chart, not the crayon, not the letter, or the donut, or the soul transactions, or the faces of the people standing next to each man during his worst moments. Something bigger. Something that goes beyond the shows themselves and into the world outside them, where one man's stupidity became a cultural institution, and the other's became a cautionary note about what happens when a creative choice stops being a choice and starts being a habit. Section 10. Cultural Legacy. Homer's stupidity became an archetype. Peter's became a warning. At some point between 1989 and right now, Homer Simpson stopped being a television character and became something else. He became a reference point, a measurement, a word that people use when they want to describe a very specific kind of lovable, limited, well-meaning human failure. When scientists at Emory University in 2010 discovered a gene in mice that appeared to block the development of normal brain function, a gene that, when disabled, made the mice noticeably smarter, they needed a name for it. They had all of the naming conventions of formal science available to them. They had Latin, they had Greek, they had the names of the researchers who discovered it. They named it the Homer Simpson gene. Not because it was funny, although it is, because everyone in the room immediately understood what they meant. That is what a cultural institution looks like. It is when the thing you built in a television writer's room becomes useful to scientists describing real biological phenomena. It is when the shorthand works so cleanly
across so many different kinds of people that it becomes the most efficient way to communicate a specific idea about intelligence and limitation and the gap between what someone could be and what they actually are. Peter Griffin has not achieved this. His name has not entered the vocabulary of scientists or dictionary editors or cultural institutions in the same way. He has generated memes. He has produced catchphrases. He has been the subject of countless internet discussions about which animated dad is funnier or dumber or more watchable. But his name does not function as a universal reference point the way Homer's does. And the reason for that gap is the same reason this essay exists. Look at what Homer's stupidity actually produced in the culture outside the show. The word dough, Homer's reflexive expression of self-directed frustration, usually delivered in the moment after he realizes he has done something wrong, was added to the Oxford English Dictionary in 2001. The Oxford English Dictionary is the most comprehensive record of the English language in existence. It documents words that have entered genuine, widespread use across the language. Dough made it in. That means a single syllable produced by a fictional animated man expressing the specific feeling of realizing you just made a preventable mistake has become officially recognized as a real English word used by real English speakers to describe a real human experience. Homer's stupidity generated a word that captured something true about being human. That is not a small thing.
That is the entire measure of whether a fictional character transcends the fiction and starts doing something useful in the world outside it. Homer and the rest of the Simpson family were also awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2000. Not just Matt Groening, not just the show. Homer Simpson specifically was recognized on the same physical stretch of sidewalk where you find the names of people who genuinely changed American entertainment. He is there because the people who decide these things determined that Homer Simpson had earned a place in the permanent record of cultural figures who mattered. The academic world has engaged with Homer Simpson in ways that are documented and verifiable. He has been referenced in studies on cognitive function, on the psychology of stupidity, on the sociology of the American working class, on the relationship between television characters and cultural identity. The Simpsons as a whole has been the subject of more serious academic writing than almost any other animated show in history, and a significant portion of that writing takes Homer as its starting point, because Homer is where the show's deepest questions about ordinary human life are most concentrated. Producer Mike Reiss, who worked on The Simpsons for years and described Homer as his favorite character to write, explained what made Homer such a rich creative subject. He said Homer embodies all 7 deadly sins. He has everything wrong with him. He is fat and bald and stupid and lazy and angry and an alcoholic. And yet, Reiss said, the character works consistently, durably, across decades of television, because Homer is pure emotion. He feels everything completely and immediately, without filtering or managing his reactions, which makes him simultaneously the most ridiculous person in any room and the most honest. His joy is total. His sadness is total. His love, when it comes, is total. That observation, that Homer's stupidity is inseparable from his emotional completeness, explains why his cultural legacy landed the way it did. People recognized something in Homer that they recognized in themselves. Not the specific failures, though those were recognizable too, but the feeling underneath them. The feeling of wanting things you should not want, and making choices you know are wrong, and loving people imperfectly, and getting things wrong in ways that cost you, and then getting up the next day and doing it again, because the people around you are worth showing up for, even when you are the reason things went wrong in the first place. Homer became an archetype because he was built around something real. The stupidity was the surface, the love was the foundation, and the love was specific and documented and expressed in ways that the audience could point to. The Maggie photos, the saxophone, the letter to Lisa, the speech at the wedding.
as proof that Homer's limitations were not the truth of him. The truth was underneath, doing the actual work of holding the character together. Peter Griffin's cultural legacy is real, but it operates differently. The chicken fight sequences, Peter's recurring, escalating physical battles with Ernie the giant chicken, which have appeared across many seasons of Family Guy, are genuinely celebrated pieces of animation. They are intricate, funny, and technically impressive, and they are cited regularly as examples of what Family Guy does well at a craft level. The fights have nothing to do with Peter's intelligence. They are pure physical comedy, and they work on that level without requiring anything from Peter's character. Quagmire's catchphrase has entered casual conversation in ways that Peter's specific catchphrases have not quite matched in terms of permanence. The show's humor, cutaway gags, pop culture references, shock comedy, has been influential on the landscape of adult animated television in ways that are documentable and real. Family Guy changed what was possible on network television in terms of what animated shows were allowed to address and how far they were allowed to go. That is a genuine contribution to the form. But Peter himself, as a character, as a figure whose specific qualities produced something lasting and useful in the cultural conversation, has not generated the kind of legacy that Homer has. He has not produced a word that entered the dictionary. He has not had his name applied to a scientific concept. He has not become the default reference point for a particular kind of human experience that people need a shorthand for. The reason is the one this essay has been building toward across every section. Homer's stupidity was built on top of something real, maintained with stated limits, protected by the people responsible for him, and expressed through a character who contained genuine love and emotional depth alongside his genuine failures. The stupidity and the humanity coexisted in Homer, and the coexistence was the thing that made him worth talking about for 30-plus years. Peter's stupidity, especially from season 8 onward, was built on top of progressively less. The warmth receded. The limits were not held. The character who existed in season 1 and season 2, the one who would take a bullet for Meg, the one who felt bad when things went wrong, the one whose stupidity lived inside a person rather than replacing one, was gradually replaced by a louder, crueler, more detached version of the same exterior. The Loathsome Characters Wiki's entry on Peter from season 8 onward describes this process and its effect on the character's reputation in terms that are difficult to argue with. It says that the Flanderization damaged the character completely, to the point where people who had once counted Peter among their favorite animated characters stopped finding him watchable. The TV Tropes character derailment page for Family Guy puts the comparison plainly. It says Peter went from a bumbling idiot with slightly good intentions, similar to Homer Simpson, only louder and more impulsive, to a character whose worst behavior made even Homer's Flanderized self look like the caring, clumsy dad he had been in The Simpsons' early years. That comparison comes from people who study these characters in detail. It is not a casual fan opinion. It is a documented critical observation about what happened to Peter over time, and where that process left him in relation to Homer. Homer's Flanderization happened too. The writers have acknowledged that they pushed his stupidity further than they originally intended, because once you establish that a character can forget something, the next episode has to top it, and the one after that has to top that. The season 10 moment where Homer admits he cannot read, contradicting earlier episodes where he was shown reading without difficulty, is a documented example of the show stretching past its own continuity for the sake of a joke. Homer got dumber at the edges as the series aged, but the core held. The Maggie photos were still there. The letter to Lisa was still written. The speech at the wedding was still delivered. The things that made Homer, Homer, the love that was specific and real and expressed in ways that cost him something, survived the Flanderization because the people making the show actively protected them. They debated where the line was. They held the floor. They had an actor who pushed back when Homer crossed into something cold. The core survived because people were paying attention to whether it survived.
Peter's core did not survive in the same way, whether that was a failure of attention or a creative decision or simply the inevitable result of a show that used shock and transgression as its primary tools. The result is the same. The Peter Griffin who exists from season 8 onward is not the Peter Griffin who would take a bullet for Meg. He is something else. Something that shares the name and the design and the voice and the setting, but has lost the interior that made the early character a person rather than a collection of behaviors. One man's stupidity became a word in the Oxford English Dictionary, and a gene named after him by scientists, and a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and 30-plus years of an audience that has never fully stopped caring about him, even through his worst seasons. The other man's stupidity became a case study in what happens when a creative choice stops being managed and starts being a habit. When the thing that was supposed to live inside a person becomes the person, and the person disappears, and what is left is just the behavior, getting louder and less connected to anything human with every passing season. Both of these outcomes make sense. They are the logical result of decisions that were made, and decisions that were not made, about what each character actually was, and what the stupidity was for. Homer's stupidity was for something. It served a purpose beyond itself. It was the surface layer of a character whose real story was about love and limitation, and the gap between who you are and who you could be if the thing blocking you were removed. The stupidity was the obstacle. The person underneath it was the point. Peter's stupidity, at its fullest development, became the point itself. And a point that is only itself, with nothing underneath it and nothing beside it, and no letter written before it closes, does not produce a cultural institution.
It produces a warning about what animated characters become when the people responsible for them stop asking what the stupidity is for and start treating the stupidity as the answer. Homer Simpson is in the dictionary. His name is on a gene. His photo is on the Walk of Fame. He is still, after more than 3 decades, the standard by which every other animated bumbling dad is measured. That is what happens when you build a stupid character on top of something real, and then protect what is real about him, even when the easier choice would have been to let it go. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.